Britannia, which has been this anthem of celebration of all great things of this country.
Okay, so singer Lily Allen has brought some attention to the anthem Rule Britannia, citing that lyrics such as Rule Britannia, Britannia rule the waves, Britons shall never be slaves, shouldn't really be sung and certainly don't belong in 2019, considering the extremely dark times this song was inspired by and certainly born from. But as per usual, once these opinions, train of thoughts reach the mainstream press, they just create their very own narrative, don't they? Enter Piers Morgan. The Piers Morgan, let's take a look, see what he has to say, which often is a lot with no weight at all, but here goes. Let's have a look, shall we?
Try and explain to me why Rule Britannia is offensive.
He's holding his head in despair. Ah, the cheek of it.
Well, I mean, the song was written in, the middle of the 1700s, and that was when Britain was fully partaking in the slave trade.
Fully partaking in the slave trade. Just to reiterate on what Joanna just said, she doesn't get to say very much because Piers just interrupts people and shouts over them. So, yes. Let's continue, shall we?
So to have lyrics like Rule Britannia and saying Britons will never, never, never be slaves.
That's right. So the song, Rule Britannia, Britain will never, never, never be slaves, was born, written and inspired in the height of British ruling, British Empire, when they were controlling all the slaves, African slave trade, shipping them throughout the country, whilst they was colonising various countries for wealth on the back of black people. As you can see from the lyrics in the song, at this time, something they were very proud of, Britain ruling the waves as slaves were shipped, African slaves from each corner of the world, whilst they sung their song, that these waves, they rule, and Britons will never be slaves. Let's continue.
While then fully participating in slavery, in 2019, I find that completely out of date. I don't think that we should be playing it and singing it on things like
one of the greatest patriotic anthems this nation
Why is it patriotic,
ever had.
though?
And after Joanna has said all that to Piers Morgan, all he has to say is one of the greatest patriotic songs of all times. This guy, there is just no talking to some people, as they often say in the Jamaican community. Some people you just cannot reason with.
Rule Britannia, which has been this anthem of celebration of all great things of this country.
Celebration, all great things of this country. British Empire, slavery. That's what the song is about, Piers. That's what the song was inspired by, Piers. Can't change that. It is what it is. Let's continue.
To come back on the point about slavery, I think you're overlooking the fact.
Okay, so this is on Piers's hype man. Let's see what he seems to think we are overlooking. These people, always trying to set us straight.
That one of the reasons we don't have an Atlantic slave trade anymore is because the Royal Navy sacrificed blood and treasure to end it after the Abolition of Slavery Act was passed. Abolition of the Slave Trade Act was passed in, 1807?
The slave trade was outlawed in both Great Britain and the United States. It would take England another 26 years and the U.S. another 58, plus a civil war, before the practice of slavery was banned outright.
The West Africa Squadron was set up, and the West Africa Squadron patrolled the Atlantic to make sure slavery was ended in the Atlantic.
What we've been seeing recently...
I've literally no idea what sort of argument this is meant to present. He's leaped 100 years forward. This song was written by events at the height of British Empire. During the African Atlantic slave trade, which Britain ran, commodifying African people. I don't know what this hype guy's talking about. He's gone 100 years in the future and claiming that this song was written about an event yet to occur 100 years after it was penned.
Colonialism. Were you okay with
I don't see it as a colonial song.
Can I make a suggestion?
I see it as a celebration of this great country.
Can I just instead
you can keep saying it's colonial. I don't see it that way, nor do many people.
Yes, Joanna can keep saying it is a colonial song because it is. It is.
Exactly is it about the connotations of saying Rule Britannia and Britain will never, never, never be slave?
You know what? It's
while
about,
also participating
in
slavery. What
you know
about that?
It's actually about celebrating us being a free country and about us actually having something to celebrate.
I actually think that with this particular song, a lot of people sing it blindly. I think it's become so much of a tradition at football matches. No, people.
Shut up, Piers. Shut up.
People usually will sing it and they'll say, okay, this is just something that we always sing.
No, I sing it knowing exactly what the lyrics say and exactly what the context is.
So are you okay with it?
Because it stirs the soul and it reminds us of the fact we're a great country.
What I think is that it reminds of us colonial rule.
It stirs the soul. In the Jamaican community, there's a saying that says when you upset those ones that have died, they must be turning in their graves. So when he mentions that his soul was stirred, it sort of took me to that. I can certainly imagine that the African that endured such dark, beyond comprehension really, of times, and then rather than fellow human beings, going against this at that time, they penned a song called Rule Britannia, Britannia rule the waves, Britons will never be slaves. So in terms of a song stirring your soul, I can certainly imagine it brings much meaning to the words that those slaves will certainly be turning in their graves by those lyrics meant for them.
Rule Britannia, which has been this anthem of celebration of all great things of this country, that now has to go too, because Lily Allen has decided, who's by the way written songs, one of which is called F You.
quite sure why... Okay, I don't know why Piers thought it would be a good idea to use that song as an example, Lily Allen's song as an example. He's basically saying, oh gosh, it's hard to even say what he's saying, because what he is saying is oftentimes so ridiculous. But he's saying, why should she be allowed to sing F you? How about we ban that rather than fussing about Rule Britannia? I mean, clearly he hasn't listened to the song. Lily Allen's song, F You, I'll leave it in the description box for you, stands against racism, against war, against discrimination to the gay community. But Piers is wondering why we allow her to sing that. I mean, I don't know if he's for real. I don't know if this guy's for real. Whew.
I've used the abbreviation. She spells it out and sings this on stage.
She spells it out and sings this on stage.
She sings it on stage.
Why are we allowing Lily Allen to spew profanity like that, but we want to ban Rule Britannia? It makes no sense to me.
What? Oh dear, Piers. Please don't talk about sense.
Why are we allowing Lily Allen to spew profanity like that, but we want to ban Rule Britannia? It makes no sense to me.
He doesn't listen, honestly. Okay. It's got to shake him off. Right, isn't it interesting that Lily Allen can raise perfectly reasonable points, and rather than that being focused on, it's twisted. The press report that she has no respect for fallen soldiers, just ignoring what she's actually citing. But that's how you dismiss people, belittle them, whip up fury, and get the nation on side. They know what they're doing, trust me. I see it all the time. Okay, so let's give you a snapshot, nearly a snapshot, into the times that this song was written. I believe it was written in 1740, and what these lyrics are precisely inspired by. Let's stay in the reality of that time. Okay, so let's watch.
Africans were taken from their homeland and forcibly shipped across the Atlantic, a journey that almost 2 million of them wouldn't survive. By the turn of the 18th century, European merchants were building vessels capable of transporting hundreds of slaves per journey. Disobedient slaves were tortured and beaten, usually whipped with the especially cruel cat-o'-nine-tails, a tool designed to inflict maximum pain.
Rule Britannia, which has been this anthem of celebration of all great things of this country.
Weapons mounted on deck in case of rebellion, and additional compartments added below deck to take on more human cargo. The crew also installed netting around the deck of the ship, designed to catch slaves who might opt for death over forced servitude. Once moved below deck, slaves would find themselves stuffed into compartments with ceilings as low as 4.5 feet, where they would spend most of their voyage.
Rule Britannia, which has been this anthem of celebration of all great things of this country.
There was no plumbing of any kind. Slaves were forced to relieve themselves where they sat, creating hellish conditions when combined with the heat and lack of ventilation below deck. Slaves who refused to eat their typical meal of rice and beans were forced to do so, sometimes with the speculum oris, a medieval tool used to pry open unwilling mouths. Women were raped and sexually abused by members of the crew, sometimes arriving in the New World carrying the children of their attackers.
Rule Britannia, which has been this anthem of celebration of all great things of this country.
Disease was spreading throughout the ship, and fresh water was running dangerously low. Captain Luke Collingwood was afraid of the financial cost of more deaths. Slaves that died of disease were not covered by the ship's insurance, but slaves who drowned were. These slaves were thrown overboard.
Rule Britannia, which has been this anthem of celebration of all great things of this country.
The slave trade was outlawed in both Great Britain and the United States. It would take England another 26 years and the U.S. another 58, plus a civil war, before the practice of slavery was banned outright.
The UK has an interesting history.
Okay, let's watch a bit of Akala. Why not? He is always on good form. To get a little bit of more background, throw that in there for you.
The UK has an interesting history when it comes to slavery. Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting because it's almost, because the US has an actual history of slavery. Like there were actually slaves, they were actually whipped, they were actually tortured, they were bred like animals and so forth.
Absolutely.
But the UK was technically responsible for all this initially because before the US was independent, the UK was sending slaves into the US, into Jamaica, into Haiti, into not Haiti.
No, Britain did. So what Britain had was, in the 18th century, Britain got the contract for what's called the asiento. So this was the right to supply enslaved people to all of the Spanish colonies and then eventually the French. So Britain became the premier sort of slave trader. So even a lot of the enslaved people who were going to the French colonies or the Spanish colonies, it was British shipping that was carrying them and selling them. So you are actually correct in that sense. But one of the things that has made race a more difficult subject to tackle head on in the UK is because the slavery happened over there, because the empire happened over there, we can pretend none of it happened here and that somehow all these buildings in Liverpool and Bristol and London have nothing to do with kind of Britain's history and participation in kind of race-based genocidal slavery.
Whilst the likes of Piers Morgan has us, has your mind think you're sort of looking at him and thinking, what is going on? Like, hello? I just want to wrap this up with a contrasting person sharing an interview snippet of Emma Watson. Contrasting to Piers Morgan, she is reasonable, not asking for much, has the ability to learn, listen. But hey, she explains better, so let's just watch.
It was a real, it was an awakening.
She said it was an awakening. For those who want to learn, you will have that same awakening. Often your thoughts are formed in ignorance, hate, guilt, stupidity, racism, but there's always time to learn if you want to, and that's key. Piers doesn't want to. Dogmatic Mr. Piers is set with his views, and yeah. I also just want to reference the book that Emma mentioned. I also have that in my collection, should you want to read. This is the book that she mentioned. Why I'm no longer talking about race to white people. Is that what it's called? Why I'm no longer talking to white people about race, by Rennie Edo Lodge. Pick it up, have a read. Reading, it's good. Reading, depending on what you're reading, as Emma said, puts things in perspective. Please do not rely on mainstream press for knowledge. I mean, who wants to be taught by Piers? He will certainly have a warped view. Go out and become awakened so we can discuss things in reality. I mean, the song Rule Britannia, there's no conundrum here where we sort of have to work out what inspired the likes of this song. Clearly, it wasn't unknown future events hundreds of years later. I mean, you know, the proof is kind of in the lyrics of the song. It was in the middle of the 17th century when British Empire, they were ruling the waves, as the song says, and they were very proud of the fact that Britons would never be slaves because they were the ruler of that empire, the ruler of British colony. And yes, that's why the song was written, that's where it was born. It is what it is. Thanks for stopping by. Ciao, ciao. And I shall leave you with Lily Allen's tweets.